Welcome back to Forester Asks Questions. I'm Tom Coates, I'm a chartered forester, and earlier this week I met up with Emma Kerr, who's the head of carbon for Scottish Woodlands, and she did a really good video, a little bit of an explainer video for carbon credits and also about the Woodland Carbon Code, which I think for anybody who's involved in forestry or interested in forestry, carbon is a little bit of a complex subject, so it does require a little bit of a sort of BBC bite-size explainer. And quite often, I guess, with the Woodland Carbon Code, sort of many foresters would associate that with planting a broadleaf species like this lovely little oak next to me. But actually it can be used to plant productive conifer species as well. However, it has to pass the additionality test. And Emma did a really great explainer on that as well, which I think is also quite a complex subject. So anyone who's interested in carbon and forestry, I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy this episode. So yeah, if you do, please click like and subscribe. I'm joined here today by Emma Kerr from Scottish Woodlands, and we're looking at one of the James Jones forest properties where we've got woodland carbon that's been verified. And I'm hoping that today Emma's going to provide some information on the sort of woodland carbon code and what carbon credits are in forestry. So I'd like to start by just asking Emma, could you give us a sort of overview of your career so far, Emma?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I head up the carbon team at Scottish Woodlands. I've been in this role for about 4.5 years now. It was a new role when I came into Scottish Woodlands, and now have a team of 4, which is great. But I'm not a born and bred forester. I grew up in Warwickshire. I did a biological science degree at Warwick University. I specialised in genetics. So then I went and worked in a genetics lab for about a year, but realised that I didn't want to be inside all the time. Then moved to southwest Scotland with my husband, and I started working just as an office administrator in a rural land agency firm, and realised that actually I quite liked that. So then I decided that I wanted to become a Royal Chartered Surveyor. So I went and did a master's part-time over 2 years at Harper Adams University. So I studied rural estate and land management, and then I did my rural chartered surveyor qualifications. Once I was qualified, I was doing a lot of private client work down in the northwest of Cumbria, and I was also assistant factor on a large agricultural estate in Dumfriesshire. So yeah, really varied work. I was doing residential letting work, I was doing farm tenancy work, and also a bit of forestry on the estate. And also the private client work, I was doing a lot of environmental management agreements, countryside stewardship agreements, so really varied. And then I took on a couple of Woodland Carbon Code projects back in 2019, 2020, and really enjoyed it, and I thought this was possibly a niche that I could explore. Then I saw the job advertised at Scottish Woodlands, and just went for it. So I don't have a forestry background, but now that I've found this forestry industry, there's more to it than I ever imagined.
Okay.
And never actually even realised that forestry could be a career. I always used to go and walk through the woods at home down in Warwickshire, but never put two and two together. So yeah, so hopefully I can be an example of that. You don't have to go. Yeah. You don't have to come from a kind of forestry family background. You can get there. And yeah, I'm just fortunate I maybe just landed in this career and now love it.
Okay. And can you say a little bit maybe and sort of keep it really sort of basic, but what are carbon credits and what is carbon in relation to forestry?
Yeah, okay. So carbon in forestry, essentially trees, once they're planted, they grow, and to grow they photosynthesize. So they're taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to photosynthesize. So what we're doing when we're looking at carbon credits is we're quantifying the amount of carbon dioxide the trees are sucking from the atmosphere. So one carbon credit relates to a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's all that means. And you'll hear the phrases carbon units, carbon credits, tons. They all mean the same thing.
Okay.
It's just 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we're just quantifying how much these trees are taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
The woodland carbon code's been mentioned a lot in previous videos, and you've mentioned it already. Could you just maybe explain what is the woodland carbon code?
Yeah, so the woodland carbon code is a assurance standard for UK new woodland creation projects. So essentially it's a standard whereby we can quantify the amount of carbon a whole site like this is going to sequester over a period of time, and that then relates to a number of carbon units over a project length. The woodland carbon code can appear quite a complicated standard, but there's just a few basic steps essentially. So we just have to register a scheme on something called the UK Land Carbon Registry. And that is before trees go in the ground and before any establishment work starts. Then we plant the site, and then you're looking to validate it, which is a paperwork exercise. And essentially what we're doing is ensuring that this woodland meets the woodland carbon code's eligibility criteria. Obviously every woodland that's planted will grow and sequester carbon. That does not mean it is eligible for the woodland carbon code. There are strict eligibility rules. But provided it is eligible, you then get issued carbon credits against that woodland, and that's a predicted number of units that woodland is likely to sequester over a period of time. And then at year 5, year 15, and every 10 years thereafter, throughout the project duration, you basically come out and do a site survey and check that woodland is growing as you've predicted and establishing as you predicted, and therefore sequestering the carbon that you have predicted. Okay. So yeah, three kind of main stages to the code.
So we've moved location and we're now at Carthat, which is a neighbouring property that James Jones also own. And Carthat has actually just gone through a verification process for the Woodland Carbon Code. And I'm hoping that Emma will say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this site has just undergone the year 5 verification survey. So under the Woodland Carbon Code at year 5, 15 and every 10 years thereafter, we have to essentially do a site survey and check that it is growing as predicted and establishing as predicted. So the year 5 survey for this site, we stratified the site, and that generated a number of plots that we needed to survey as per the Woodland Carbon Code survey protocol. And then essentially at year 5, we're just assessing that the whole site is reaching 90% target stocking density.
Okay.
So in the conifers, we did a 5.6 metre circular plot. In the broadleaves, we're doing an 8 metre circular plot. And in each plot, we're counting the number of trees, identifying the species, and noting the height. And you can see, obviously, behind us, some of them are a lot taller than I am, and are doing really, really well. And essentially, we gather all that information, put it into a Woodland Carbon Code monitoring report, and we also prepare a project progress report just to give an indication of how the woodland's doing, and just making sure that it's establishing as predicted. But yeah, this site just been surveyed, and yeah, it's doing really, really well and is over target stocking density, so that's great.
You've touched on before about the additionality test, and I was sort of hoping you'd maybe just sort of go into a little bit more detail about what the additionality test is, and sort of for the layperson, if you know what I mean.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I can be guilty of going down an additionality rabbit hole, so I'll keep it as basic as possible. So essentially, the additionality test for the Woodland Carbon Code is made up of 2 cash flows. So essentially, we have to prepare a cash flow for the forestry scenario over the project length, let's say 50 years. And we have to compare that cash flow to a cash flow of the previous land use. So if we didn't plant trees here and it was going to stay in permanent pasture, say, what would the cash flow look like for that 50 years if it was just pasture? So we populate 2 cash flows, And we basically compare the net present value of either the forestry scenario or the previous land use scenario. And in order to pass the additionality test, we need to show that the forestry scenario has a more negative net present value than the previous land use. So we essentially need to show that we need the income from the sale of carbon to make the forestry scenario more financially viable over the long term than the previous land use.
Okay.
Now we have the Woodland Carbon Code now has a standardised additionality test.
Yep.
So we input figures about the forestry site, and then it would populate a standardised cash flow. And we'd also have to choose what the previous land use type was, whether that was less favoured area ground, lowland or arable, and again it will populate a standardised cash flow for the previous land use. And then you're essentially comparing the net present values of both scenarios.
So is this essentially how productive forestry sometimes sort of falls foul of not falling into the carbon credit schemes in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we do have an element of productive conifer or even productive broadleafs within that site, the cash flow will populate timber income at a certain time. Now, in October 22, the Woodland Carbon could introduce a standardised model where it would populate when you were going to get timber income in. So regardless of the time that you would fell Sitka, say, the Woodland Carbon Code cash flow will assume you're going to get the income at year 35, even if you don't. Now, prior to October 22, there wasn't a standardised template for the additionality cash flow. We would do a site-specific cash flow. So we could input exactly when we were going to thin, what tonnages we were going to get, and when you were going to fell various species. So it was a more realistic view of the site and a realistic additionality result. But now we're in this kind of standardised model. It can be difficult to pass additionality if we've got a high level of productive conifer in the scheme.
Okay. And so just to sort of move on from that then, what would you say the misconceptions about carbon credits are?
Absolutely. I think one of the main ones is in a carbon perspective, conifers are bad, broadleafs are good. But I can't quite understand that misconception because as we see here today, these conifers are obviously growing really well, obviously photosynthesizing and sequestering a lot of carbon and quickly. Your broadleaves obviously are also really good for carbon, but they are slower growing. So they're going to be reaching kind of peak carbon sequestration a lot later on. Whereas our fast growing conifers are obviously going to be growing quickly and sequestering carbon quickly. And if we are talking about net zero targets, these are the species that are going to be delivering the verified carbon that we need, before 2050. And also, in addition to that, locking up carbon in the built environment. Whereas, maybe the broadleafs aren't potentially going to do that. So that's definitely one main misconception. But it could be as well to do with the other co-benefits that woodlands provide. I think everybody assumes broadleaves are, yes, they sequester the carbon, but also have all the other co-benefits that go with them, but conifers do as well. So it's just making sure that we're getting that message out there about, these are also good trees. What
about, sort of just leave us with your thoughts on what are you optimistic about for the future of forestry in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm obviously in quite a niche sector of the forestry industry. Carbon is still a new and a niche area. I think we're obviously all talking about carbon at the moment, but carbon is just one of the ecosystem service benefits that woodland can provide. So I think over the next few years we're going to see, and we are already seeing that already, the quantification of other ecosystem services, whether that be biodiversity uplift. There's a woodland water code as well in development. So I really see that we're going to be looking at the wider services that the woodland can provide, and how we can monetize those. And there has been talk about how we could, bundle or stack these benefits within the kind of carbon price or alongside the carbon unit. So it'll be really interesting to see where that develops over the next few years. So I might not be the head of carbon, I might be the head of natural capital in a few years' time, who knows.
Well, I hope that is the case, and thank you very much for your time today. It's been really interesting talking to you about a very complex and sometimes quite sort of difficult to understand subject. I think you've broke it down brilliantly, so thanks for that, Emma.
Great. No, it was really good to speak to you.